The EFF's Deputy President Floyd Shivambu says South Africa should continue strengthening diplomatic ties with Russia and not bow to international pressure to stand in solidarity with Ukraine. At the same time, the party has been vocal on several other issues, including Parliament's decision to go ahead with the impeachment process against Public Protector Advocate Busisiwe Mkhwebane. For more on this, I'm joined in studio by EFF Deputy President Mr. Shivambu. Thank you so much for your time. I'll just begin with the breaking news. I mean, the International Court of Justice ruling that Russia must immediately suspend its military operations in Ukraine.
Look, I think the whole world must begin to appreciate that a majority, if not all of these multilateral international institutions have thus far been instruments of Western imperialism. So whatever the United States and Western Europe says should happen, it becomes the tune. So if the ICJ was consistent with its ruling, it should have condemned Ukraine's bombing of Donbas from 2014 until now. The United Nations itself has come to an acknowledgement that more than 14,000 people have lost their lives, and that includes thousands of civilians. And the official report of the United Nations thus far in terms of those who have lost their lives in the so-called war, which is a necessary military special operations in Ukraine, has never even reached 1,000, but already is being described and mischaracterized as genocide. It's a mischaracterization, and it's also part of this wave of trying to bully the world into one singular perspective that basically represents U.S. imperialism and dominance. And that must be rejected with contempt. If the ICJ was consistent, they should have condemned what happened in Iraq, they should have condemned what happened in Libya, they should have condemned what NATO did in Yugoslavia as well. Not this selective application of justice depending on who is on the other side of the law. So what the ICJ has basically done is problematic and must never be legitimated. Hence, we need a different form of global governance of institutions, including the United Nations, that are representative of all the people of the world, not just dominated by a few Western imperial forces.
So are you saying that the numbers that we are receiving, of course, there's no official figures except for the number of refugees that are fleeing. We are hearing even from the Ukrainian president, for example, saying that there's thousands of Russian soldiers that are being killed, thousands of his own people that are also being killed on a daily basis. Are you saying that those numbers are not a true reflection of what's on the ground?
Now, the most dependable information now that we can depend on and rely on to make reference is the numbers of the United Nations, not of the Ukrainian government or even of any other of the people or the institutions or governments that are involved in the conflict. The official numbers is that of the United Nations, and as per yesterday, they had said that it's about 726 people who have lost their lives in the civilian, in the entire special military operation. And one thing that is very distinct, by the way, by this special necessary military operation is that it's not targeting civilian infrastructure, it is not targeting civilians. If this was being conducted by the imperialist US like they did in Libya, like they are doing in Syria, like they did in Afghanistan, like they did in all these areas where they went to try to force a different systems of government. They kill everyone, they destroy everything. But the Russians, in terms of how they are approaching this, has got some degree of respect and honor that must be appreciated. And the context must be given, of course, in terms of why they have to take the actions that they're taking currently.
So I'll get to the action that you say they have to take in just a moment, but let's talk about, the comments that you're making around the civilian areas. Mariupol, for example, we're seeing civilians that are crying, saying that they are losing everything. You're looking at some of the civilian areas, where people are still trying to either piece together some of their livelihoods. Who do you say then is behind that? Because we are seeing some buildings being destroyed and property being destroyed and houses as well. Is it the Ukrainian government or what's going on there? Because you say that it's the Russians are not hitting civilian areas.
Now, look, you must remember that at the beginning of these necessary military special operations, what the Ukrainian government did was to release criminals from prisons and said that even civilians must be armed to fight against the Russian Federation. So in many instances, and a lot of evidence is beginning to rise now to the fore and to the surface, that it's these amateur soldiers, the toy soldiers that have been mobilized, including thugs that were in prison, that have been mobilized by the Ukrainian government and are just committing crimes. And then the Western Empire is now trying to force feed to the world a narrative that the Russian Federation is destroying civilian spaces, and that is not the case. Like, there is no one who can come with hardcore evidence that the Russian military forces are destroying civilian spaces. If they were doing that, they are far much superior to Ukrainian government, even with the sponsorship that is coming from the Americans and Germany and France and all these Western European countries. But they would have finished the operations if they were taking the approach of going for civilian spaces. But as far as we're concerned, there is no such happening thus far.
Let's talk about the context, as you say, because, of course, Russia has been talking about these security threats for quite some time now. And we did even hear from the Russian ambassador speaking at a debate at UJ, talking about how he says that they had no choice but to do this. You met with him earlier on with some of the members of the Central Command team. What was the outcome of that meeting?
Now, look, I think first let's give the context of what is our own interpretation of what is happening in Ukraine currently. Very briefly. Briefly is that the Russian Federation took a necessary action to avert the eastward expansion of NATO, particularly into Eastern Europe. They already have gotten the Baltic states of Estonia, of Latvia, and Lithuania to join NATO, which basically means that they are going to station their military bases in those countries, which are on the borders and closer to Russia. And already Ukraine had already made a commitment to join NATO, and NATO had said that such must be allowed. That is an existing security threat. It's actually an existential threat to Russia to allow NATO to set up its operations on its borders, because we know the history of NATO, that they've conducted wars which were senseless. They went to Iraq on the basis that these weapons of mass destruction, they killed the sitting head of state there, and then they destroyed the whole country and left with everything else, and they still continue to exploit the oil there. The same thing they did with brother leader Muammar Gaddafi, saying they're enforcing a special no-fly zone, and then they destroyed the whole country. It's not going to be recovered anytime soon, not in our lifetime, because that is what they're doing. So Russia is not in the wrong to avert NATO's expansion towards its borders. But also there's other aspect which obviously applies to the defense of the ethnic Russians that stay in Donbas. The United Nations has confirmed that it's close to 15,000 people now who have been killed by the Ukrainian government. The ICJ never said anything about that. The Security Council never said anything about that. The General Assembly never had a special sitting to condemn the activities of genocide that is being conducted by the Ukrainian government on its own people, who coincidentally happen to be ethnic Russians, like they were trying to do with Crimea, which later on got to vote itself out of the Ukrainian territory. So
are you saying, in a nutshell, that Ukraine as a sovereign state is not allowed to choose who it aligns itself to?
Look, in terms of international law and practice, there's something called equal and indivisible security, that your security is intricately linked with your neighbors. You can't say that what overrides everything is your allies who must come and set military bases next to the people who otherwise, or countries that otherwise will never coexist with you. So if Cuba, by the way, voted with Russia in the United Nations General Assembly and everywhere else, would the United States ever agree that the Russian Federation must go and put up army bases and missiles in Cuba, which is literally like few kilometers from the nearest part of the United States in Miami? It will never happen, because there is an appreciation that the individual securities of these countries is linked to the region as a whole, not just of yourselves. You can't go and encircle Russia with NATO bases and military power, which can be utilized in a way that is opportunistic, and it's about the natural resources, it's about taking over the economy. You know that Russia is the biggest supplier of gas, of oil to most parts of Western Europe and to the world. And we know the greedy, callous, and rapacious manner in which the US has been taking over governments for selfish purposes. So Russia is correct to avert and prevent much more decisively the invasion of NATO forces in the areas surrounding
We're running out of
Russia.
time, but I need you to very briefly, in 30 seconds, what was your meeting, the outcome of the meeting with the
The meeting
Russian
was to get a briefing from the ambassador of Russia in terms of what is transpiring, but also was to reaffirm the EFF support of Russia's decisive action of preventing the expansion of the imperialists of NATO, because we know their history. They've destroyed many countries here in the African country. They've destroyed Libya. They've destroyed Somalia. They've got no interest of the people. So that is what we're busy with today, and we are unapologetic about it. We actually issued a statement to explain the context within which the meeting was held.
All right, and then let's move on. There's another developing story around Advocate Busisiwe Mkhwebane. We saw yesterday Parliament saying that it's going ahead with the impeachment process. The EFF has had previously said that this process must be halted, and it spoke so even after that particular court case in the Western Cape that found, the process wanting in two of, some of its processes there. But Parliament says it's going ahead. This is despite Advocate Busisiwe Mkhwebane's intention to take this matter back to court. Your reaction to this?
Look, our view is that the whole chasing of the public protector is just a witch hunt which is conducted by a faction in the ANC that doesn't want to be held accountable. And we can assure South Africa that she will never be removed, because you need 2/3 of Parliament to remove a public protector. It is not going to happen. Also, it will set a wrong precedent to remove a public protector, because whoever gets into that office will always live with the fear that politicians who are running away from accountability can just remove you as and when they wish. So the public protector is not going to go anywhere. She's going to finish her term. It's just a wasteful expenditure exercise which Parliament is engaging in. We'll advise them accordingly when we then participate in that process. It is not going to remove the public protector. She's going to stay in office until the end of the term.
So basically, I hear you saying that they don't have your vote on this one.
That is clear. We can't vote for factionalism of people who do not want to be held accountable, because the issues that she's suffering for is to reveal the fact that a president of the ANC went to take money from white capitalists to buy his organization to become a president. That is what she's suffering for. And there's absolutely nothing wrong with that. And of course, courts have been coerced to take a different decision and approach to that particular report. But the fact of the matter is that there was a capture of their own organization and a later on of the state by a faction in the ANC that is depending on white capitalist men who are now in control of South Africa's government. Hence, you see the privatization of SAA, the mutilation of Eskom, and later on there will be privatization of Denel and a variety of other components of the state because of what Ramaphosa has to pay back to his handlers.
So yesterday I spoke to Solima Paila from the SACP. I asked him his initial reaction to the public protector. He says that she's factional and this process should go ahead. And you are saying this is a factional ruling, but the SACP says she herself is factional.
Do you know what is going to make your life very easy, right? You must stop taking Solima Paila serious. Really. What would even entertain Solima Paila? Who is Solima Paila? What is his claim to fame? What does he represent? He's a factionalist himself who, always tries to coordinate ANC factions for careerist purposes. There's nothing that he stands for. So there's really no need to entertain Solima Paila. Who is he? He represents absolutely nothing. He claims to be a communist and everything else, but there's nothing that says he's communist. He is the biggest supporter of Ramaphosa, who is busy working against what a communist party will otherwise stand for. So, why would we even entertain Solima Paila? It's not worth entertaining, really.
Okay, let's move on very quickly and go to the appointment of the incoming Chief Justice Raymond Zondo. I saw your statement. Of course, you're not happy with it. But one thing that I could not help but look at the EFF statement. It says that it was his spiteful, vindictive and dishonest decision that led to the greatest security threat in a post-democratic South Africa, which saw over 300 lives being lost during the unrest. Of course, the unrest report talks about the spark being the arrest of the former President Jacob Zuma. But this decision to subsequently send him to prison and find him guilty was taken by a majority judgment. Are you putting the blame of what we saw in July squarely on the incoming Chief Justice, despite the judgment being by a majority?
Remember that the imprisonment of former President Jacob Zuma started with Raymond Zondo refusing to recuse himself from the Judicial Commission of Inquiry into so-called state capture. And he said that he is not close to President Zuma and all of those things. And he actually presided over an issue, and then he gave a judgment by himself. But when he went to be interviewed in the Judicial Services Commission, he confirmed the proximity that they've had a lot of private meetings. And was saying he's dishonest. Like, how do you appoint a person who has contradicted themselves publicly? When he was giving the judgment in the state capture, so-called state capture commission, he said that I've got no proximity to this person, I do not know him, but he went to the JSE, he said something contrary. And we're saying that the decision that he took of refusing to recuse himself at that time led South Africa into chaos that led to loss of life of so many people. And of course, part of his appointment is part of this factionalism that is running this country for narrow interest of few individuals, and is controlled by the white capitalist establishment that controls Cyril Ramaphosa.
So, Floyd, very briefly, finally, we're out of time. I'd like us to take a look at a video that emanated from Parliament this afternoon, and this is a video of someone there with that statue of Louis Botha. We know how the EFF feels about this particular statue. In 2015, we saw talk around this, even EFF President Julius Malema saying the Western Cape EFF must do something, must make a plan about this statue. It doesn't matter what kind of plan. Is that an EFF member there?
I'm not aware if he is an EFF member, but that person who's doing that is a revolutionary. He must be commended for taking down an apartheid statue of a colonial murderer, of an apartheid criminal who came to ravage and pillage our country. That is revolutionary action. It's not. That is revolution. Revolution does not have to always comply with the law. That is commendable, and I think that fighter must be honored for taking that decisive step of removing the statue of a criminal, Lou Botha, who has raped people, has pillaged our country, has killed our forefathers in order to take control. And why do we still have that absolute rubbish in front of a democratic parliament?
You remember
that fighter must be celebrated.
You remember in 2015, Peter Groenewald said this is part of history. You can't seek to erase it. And they said that they may even want to think about court action. I wonder if the EFF, because you've been unhappy with this particular statue and many others for quite some time, have you spoken to the Heritage Council about these?
We don't agree that history must be placed in front of Parliament in the form of celebrating them. The manner in which that statue is placed in front of a democratic parliament is to celebrate it. And we can't be celebrating apartheid criminals and colonial murderers. We can't be doing that. Of course, we have been engaged and we continuously are engaged in attempts to remove all these colonial murderers and change the names of streets that are named after them and all the towns and cities that are named after them, so that we have a truly post-colonial South Africa that does not embrace colonial murderers that have ravaged this country, who have still not recovered from the pain that they have caused to black people in South Africa. So we cannot celebrate those people, and that fighter must be celebrated for that decisive action.
But when you look at something like this, some have said on social media, Floyd, when they looked at this, they were saying it poses yet another security threat to Parliament, and just after we saw the fire earlier this year. What do you say to some of those who are saying that this is an ongoing security threat to Parliament?
There is no security threat to Parliament. Parliament burned because of electric faults, that those buildings were not maintained by anyone. There is no individual who went to ban Parliament. It's because of the electronic issues. In the internal reports that we have been given in Parliament, it shows even the fire departments of Cape Town and the Western Cape government admit that what caused the fire in Parliament is an electronic fault, and there have been so many cautions by so many institutions that deal with occupational health and safety of buildings that this building is not in a good condition to could continue accommodating people.
So what you're saying is that Zadile Mafia is not the man?
No, that you know that is clownish. Like to even want to suggest that a homeless person could go and ban Parliament, it's not there. That doesn't even arise. There is no one who even has got any linkage. There's not even a single footage in the parliamentary system that links that a homeless person to the banning of Parliament. It happened because of electric faults, and that is a fact that later on everyone else will begin to realize. But you know how these ANC criminals operate. They always shift blame and blame other people except themselves, because if we were to then speak much more clearly that it is their negligence that banned Parliament, they have to take responsibility. And they are running away from responsibility by then shifting the blame to someone else.
Floyd, I can't help but ask you this. During the proceedings, we heard him, in his own words, talk about how he wants Janusz Walush to be freed on the 11th of February, saying that that is the same date that Nelson Mandela was also freed. Those were his words. I wonder, what do you make of that?
I am honestly not interested of what he says in court. I'm not his legal representative, and I'm not interested because what I know, as a matter of fact, is that he has got nothing to do with the banning of Parliament. Parliament was banned because of the negligence of the sitting government of the ANC of not looking after that infrastructure. It burned down because of the electric faults, and the reports that came from the fire departments have confirmed that indisputable fact. So what he says there, I've got no interest, has got nothing to do with what we are making an analysis on here. The fact of the matter is that Parliament was banned because of the negligence of the ANC government.
Floyd, what does the EFF say about what is happening in the city of Johannesburg? 130 employees are saying that their contracts, obviously they've been fired now, contracts have been rescinded, and they say that this is a political decision. They're not very happy with it. We know it might end up in the courts because we were speaking to their legal representatives yesterday. I wonder what is the view of the EFF in what's going on there?
So the view of the EFF is that because the ANC unlawfully employed those people into permanent positions, those appointments must be reversed. And then a proper process, if they are eligible employees of government, they will reapply, they can be employed again if they are competent employees of the state. But you don't, when you're losing power in a municipality, you then turn what are supposed to be contract employments into permanent positions so that you hold whoever is the new political arrangement and leadership of the city under the hostage of those people who are now in permanent positions without any contractual renewals and observations. So if those people have been unlawfully appointed, those appointments must be reversed. And if they think that they were legally appointed, they've got recourse. They can go to court and say to court that we were unfairly dismissed. There are so many processes that they can follow. But if the ANC try to smuggle people because they're losing power, it must not be permitted because they're going to still lose a lot of power, not only in municipalities. Now it's going to provinces and national government when we defeat them in 2024.
Floyd, I hope we speak again soon because there's quite a lot that is unfolding, especially in the city of Johannesburg, but also various other issues in the political arena. But we have to leave it there for now because we are, in fact, out of time. That was the EFF Deputy President, Floyd Shivambu.